So I want you to just understand how wide-ranging this bill is. This is going to get into everybody's pockets. And I'm not talking about businesses. I'm talking about individuals. The dadgum government's going to be in everybody's pocket with this bill. This gives the government permission to look at your records. In fact, it requires your bank to keep them and send them to the federal government, to this new bureau we're creating. This little 1,408-page bill, which I think with amendments is now over 1,500 pages, probably should have been 3 bills. Probably should have been 3 bills, and we could have worked it properly, and maybe people would have read it. This is a brand new bureau. We don't have enough government. We're going to start a whole new bureau, and we're going to turn everything financial over to that bureau. But don't worry about it. We're going to stick it under the Federal Reserve, which we really don't have any control over. And we're telling the Federal Reserve, you don't have any control over this new bureau. But you have to give up to 12% of your money to operate this bureau. That's why we put it under there. It'll be off budget, so it won't show up right away in the deficits. But it does. It's going to cost us 12% of the operating revenue of the Federal Reserves. Anybody know how much that is? Well, they're going to get 12% of it. And what really fascinates me is following that, there's a paragraph that says that it will be adjusted for inflation. Wow. Let's see, if I get 12% of something, it's probably an expanding amount from year to year anyway. But it doesn't expand one year. I'm still going to get, this bureau is still going to get the money as though the economy had expanded. Well, I get worked up over it because I had an amendment that I think might have solved things for people. It certainly would have calmed me down a little bit. And that's one that would have provided for personal, individual privacy. I wasn't allowed to bring that up. I wasn't allowed to make it pending, in which case it would have been germane now, in which case we would have been able to vote on it now. I was kept from doing that. That's because somebody intends to give this bureau unlimited power to snoop. It's going to be devoted to snooping in personal records. And my amendment very simply would have prevented Big Brother from looking over your shoulder at your personal financial records unless you give permission. You know, part of what we want to do here is if you're having a problem with your credit card company, we're hoping there's somebody that can fix it. Now, sometimes that happens in your state, but it doesn't always happen in the state. So the way this was sold is if you're having a problem with your credit card, you get a hold of this bureau, by golly, they will straighten it out. Well, they're going to be looking at your records whether you have a problem or not. Maybe they're going to decide whether you have a problem or not. There's no real jurisdiction in here. 268 pages, but it doesn't say exactly what this outfit's going to do. And they get to write their own rules. And nobody gets to oversee their rules. And then they enforce those rules. And there isn't any real limit on that except for the amount of fines that they can charge, which later I'll mention, and they're pretty drastic anyway. Think about this. The federal government would now be allowed to collect all kinds of financial data about consumers, not just about potentially deceptive practices or even shady Wall Street actions, but more specifically, monitoring how we as consumers do our banking, how and why we purchase products, where and when we pull $20 out of the ATM. I ask you, how does this snooping into our daily personal lives protect consumers? This bill was sold to the public as a way to rein in Wall Street. But near as I can tell, this one section that we haven't talked much about is the perfect excuse for Big Brother to worm his way even further into our lives and our privacy. In reality, this bill encourages consumers to rely on government to protect us from ourselves, from bad decisions we make, instead of empowering personal due diligence. We have the inherent freedom in this country to make choices, and even the freedom to make bad choices. In America, that's the way it works. That's how it's supposed to work. I went to an honor flight yesterday for Wyomingites that fought in World War II, coming to visit their memorial, very late in happening. All of them are over 80 years old. And I want you to know they're paying more attention than they ever have in my lifetime to what's going on in the federal government. And they had questions about what's going on here. They said, you know, we didn't fight for that. We fought for freedom. Talking about how long this bill is taking to talk about. 1,408 pages ought to take a while. I know I had a visit from the economic advisor to the president, Mr. Summers, and I just talked about this section. He said, oh, no, this is going to work just like the FDA and OSHA. Well, I know a lot of people aren't too pleased about OSHA, but I couldn't buy that argument because I'm the ranking member on health, education, labor, and pensions. OSHA is under us. Food and Drug Administration is under us. We know about oversight and who has control and who writes the regulations and who gets to oversee the regulations, and just as importantly, where they get their budget, where they get the appropriations, the money to operate on. Remember I said that this one's going to get 12% of the operating revenues of the Federal Reserve. Now that won't show up in a score because the Federal Reserve's off here at the side. The amendment that we had to have an audit of the Federal Reserve, which is probably long overdue, will show that. But it won't show up in a score because they're spending it before it comes into the federal government's budget. But it will reduce the amount of money that comes to the federal government, so it will add to the debt and the deficit. So I think that we ought to require this new bureau. New bureau. How many people do you think they'll hire? In the health bill, we gave permission, and I guess it's for IRS agents to look at who's buying insurance and who's not buying insurance and whether they're buying the mandatory insurance, mandatory minimum that we put on there. But we hired 16,000 IRS agents. That's where the growth is in the job market. It's still kind of stagnant, but we're adding a lot of government employees. 16,000 internal revenue agents to see if you're buying the right kind of insurance or paying the fee that if you don't. Well, that kind of minor in light of this one. We didn't even say how big this bureau could be. We didn't limit their money, and we didn't say that we would ever look at anything that they do. Now, I'm sure we're going to have to, because we're going to have people from all over this country yelling and screaming about somebody getting into their pocket. Certainly hope they have a conference on this bill. Maybe it will solve some of the problems in here, and there are still problems in every single section. The way we're doing things around here is to lay down a bill and say, hey, this is the way it's going to be. If you want to make a little tweak in exchange for voting for it, that'll be okay, but don't count on making any major changes, even if they're great ideas. When Kennedy and I worked on bills, we went through a committee process. And in the committee process, we looked at every amendment that came in, recognizing that there was the seed of an idea there that maybe needed to be included in the bill. The whole thing might not work, but there ought to at least be a seed there because somebody thought of a way that a bill ought to be improved. We have eliminated that this year. This year, we're going to take it to the floor, and if you want to try and make an amendment, you can, but remember we have the majority of the votes and we'll put a 60-vote threshold on it, which means probably neither side will be able to do many amendments, and I think that's shown by what we've been able to do here for the last time. And then immediately we'll start complaining about how much time has been taken. How much time has been taken to debate this bill? Well, let me tell you, a whole lot more time should have been taken to debate this bill. A whole lot more amendments should have been looked at with this bill. We might have made some kind of a unanimous consent that they all had to be relevant to the bill, but we should have considered the ones that are relevant to the bill and not gone off in different areas. But there are a lot of people out there that are complaining about this, and they've looked at their part of the bill, and they know that it's going to damage their business. You know, I don't very often get upset, but I'm upset. And I think I'm just a reflection of the average person out there. The average person who might have just looked through a little bit of this, and they can do that on their computer now. And they do expect us to read it, and I expect that there are a lot of people that have not read Title 10. Because if they'd read Title 10, I think they'd be just as upset as I am.